Yesterday's conspiracy theories, tomorrow's headlines. Most are still asleep and I ain't talking about no bedtime. The truth is not a Google search, you need to get your head right. The Greek goddess of illusion was called Media and I'm not a coincidence theorist, I look for thread lines. Smashing every deadline, no longer smashing red wine. Though I can hear the bells chime, it feels like the end times. That probably should have been smashed on red wine, but the carnal mind is foolish. Obey and end up ghoulish. Don't get used by instinct, take control and learn to use it. Make a load of earnest music, earn a few quid, learn a few tricks. Sure, the truth is persecuted, this whole world is pure abusive. Know a bit about everything and everything about nothing. Figured out my noggin while you picture out shopping. You sit about watching while I dish it out, stop it. I don't mean to sound cocky, I'm not even proud of it. It's a second itch to me just to mean it's out honest. I don't even need to sound honest, never been about profit. Everything but out on it, you can bet your house on it. Doubt I'll be out for the count when the sounds, and I'm down for the beat, no beat down. I mean, how long's it been? Help me out. I've been the only one who's held me down. All in the mind, hell freeze now. Still sick with it, healthy how? Few bars down and the world freaked out. I don't reach out, I seek out to speak out. I'ma recount the reasons they beat out. I'm not the way, no way. I have seen the way. Yeah. Seek, speak, repeat. There's no way.
Hello, how are you? Good afternoon, my dear friends and family across this beautiful earth. I'm the host of the 509 Divine Pines podcast, Joseph Daniel Pena, and today we got some more cannabis topics for you. But first, I want you guys to like, subscribe, share, tell your friends, and tell your ancestors all around you, your aunts, uncles, your cousins, all your family, all your friends. Tell your boss at work too. Show them. All right. And yes, let's just go ahead and thank my sponsors over at naturalaction.com for the water ionizers that will get your body vibrating. It is powerful stuff, man. We just need a little bit of supercharged water in our system because, we're made of so much water. We need to charge it up. And my boy over at naturalaction.com got the coupon code for you. Use coupon code 509 Divine Pine. Oh, wait, apologize. 509 DP-10 for 10% off your order of $2,500 or less. 509 DP-20 for 20% off your order of $2,500 or more. And go check out boomerboost.com for supplements, vitamins, nutrients, all the proper blends that you need. Look, I've been getting compliments every week. My confidence is through the roof. I'm happy. People are literally like, "Hey, man, I'm buying your stuff," and I'm like, "All right, cool." I'm like, "Okay, show me." I'm not sure if they do, but they tell me that, and it's cool to even understand it. Like, I mean, look, it's kind of a little bit pricey, but it's worth it. You guys spend the same amount of money on your Jordans, and you wear them once. Use this time and information that I'm giving you. I'm an athlete. I love this stuff. This is premium organic nutrients for you. You can trust me. Just check out my Instagram. You'll see. Use coupon code JOE30 for 30% off your order. And we are back in action. So today we have Stephen Gray. We got him last week, and today we are going to continue the conversation. It's been a fabulous time with him. And for all my new viewers, Stephen Gray has been a traveling spiritual and sacred medicine researcher for close to 50 years. He is a writer, educator, podcaster, psychedelic conference organizer, speaker, and cannabis ceremony leader. Stephen is the author and editor of Cannabis and Spirituality, an explorer's guide to an ancient plant spirit ally, and his new book, How Psychedelics Can Help Save the World, Visionary and Indigenous Voices Speak Out. Sorry, I fumbled that word a little bit. It's okay. Hey, Stephen, how you doing?
I'm all right. Thanks, Joseph.
Hey, okay. Well, it's sunny over here. I'm doing amazing. The West Coast is always blazing. I always like to say the West Coast got the best smoke, and you know that too, my friend.
Well, before legalization kicked in, which it is federally in Canada now, um, BC bud was famous in the States as well. They used to, export a lot of it down to the States. BC meaning British Columbia, where I'm from.
Yes, I actually do remember that from back in the day, and I did happen to have that once. I have been smoking for about like 12, maybe 13 years now, and been around it. Yeah, so I do remember it, and it was all right. It was unique. It definitely looked different. I mean, West Coast has been doing this for a long time. Not just BC, but we got the Kush Triangle. We got the triangle right here in California. Well, I'm not in California, but California's close enough to both of us. And it's Humboldt County. Humboldt has been growing some amazing herbs. I'm sure you have some stories from that back in the day.
Well, I wasn't involved in anything around Humboldt County, but I'm well aware of that area, and I've actually traveled through it a couple of times. And yeah, no, I know that, a little about the history with all that, and some of the nasty sides of the history with military planes flying over them and dumping chemicals on them and blah blah. So it's been a
really?
Oh yeah,
Let's hear about that. I don't know.
Well, I'm gonna answer that question in a somewhat different way, and I'm gonna recommend a book. I'm just reading it now. I'm only at about page 70 or 80, but it's great. It's by Dr. Peter Grinspoon, Grin Spoon. His dad, Dr. Lester Grinspoon, wrote two really influential books. His dad is he's passed away a couple of years ago, was a psychiatrist at Harvard, and he actually set out to try to prove why cannabis is bad for you, and ended up with the complete opposite. And so he wrote a book in 1971 called Marijuana with an H, Marijuana Reconsidered, which was very influential. And then he wrote another book in 1993 called Marijuana, the Forbidden Medicine. And now his son, Peter, who's also an MD, is an MD. He has been a cannabis lover his whole life, but he's also got a rigorous mind. So he's very fair-minded and objective about all this stuff, but he's also he's from Massachusetts, so they've had medical cannabis for quite a while. So he has a lot of experience prescribing medical cannabis for different kinds of conditions. And one of the things that he points out, that anyone who really wants to understand a little bit about the relevant political history of cannabis, I would highly recommend they read that book, because basically he just goes, and there are other books that are like that too. There's another great book called Chasing the Scream, which goes through the history going back to about 1930. But Grinspoon points out how impossible it has been to get fair, legitimate, funded, approved studies done, because of incredible bias, stigma, ignorance, and nefarious self-serving attitudes from corporations, pharmaceuticals, and law enforcement, and that sort of thing. So part of that, and actually now that I think of it, Chasing the Scream goes into that side of it more than Peter Grinspoon does. But they've been, the feds have been brutal trying to suppress cannabis growing and use and all that. It's a tragedy. It has been a tragedy. I don't know how many people, like, millions of people have been thrown in jail for mere possession or similar things, and it's ruined lives. And it's also racist, because it's, you're 4 times as more likely to end up in prison for a cannabis associated offense, quote unquote offense, because it's not an offense, than a white person, for example. So yeah, there's a lot of that. They were trying to eradicate a lot of the growers in Humboldt County had to go indoors because of that. It's still happening outdoors, but and that's a whole other situation, because once they started medical cannabis. They legalized medical cannabis in California in 1996. And I don't know when, but more recently, much more recently, of course, made recreational or all, whatever you want to call it, types of cannabis use legal for adults. And so that's actually had a huge effect on the underground market. So as far as I know, Humboldt County ain't what it used to be. Prices have dropped precipitously. It's much harder to make a living as an underground grower than it was then. So I don't know how people have adapted. Anyway, enough about that.
Yeah, yeah. I've actually heard some things like these recreational seeds and these medical seeds, and the soils are so controlled that it's almost like you're not even smoking the same plant. Personally, I find it that way. I mean, when I'm on homegrown, it's definitely a lot better. And that brings us back into the real topics that we got today. So, feeling better, my spirit comes out, and I think that there's this ancient tradition that we're connecting with, and you in your Cannabis and Spirituality and Explorer's Guide to an Ancient Plant Spirit Ally would definitely agree. Let's just briefly, I guess, cover that for my viewers. If you just want to talk just a quick overview about the book, and yeah.
Sure. Well, since you mentioned the ancient aspect of it, maybe I think it'd be fun for some people to hear about a little bit about the history of cannabis use. First of all, it's far older than humanity. The people that study that stuff, I don't know, historical, but botanists or whoever they are, estimate that the lineage, it's called, I believe, the Cannabaceae lineage that cannabis is a part of, goes back somewhere between 30 and 90 million years on this planet.
Whoa.
So it's been around a lot longer than we have. And when humans came along, and probably I mean, nobody had any records until 5 or 6, 7,000 years ago. There's no written record that goes beyond that. But think about it this way. You needed to know the uses of every single plant in your neighborhood. Just survival, right? Simply needed to know it. You need to know which plants were poisonous. You needed to know which ones were edible. You needed to know which ones could be used for medicine, which ones could be used for clothing and building materials, et cetera, right? So, going God knows how far back, people would have known about cannabis. There's no doubt, right? And then all you needed to do, again, we don't know because going too far back, because there's no written records, but all you needed to do was, you had some extra stalks and leaves and throw them on the bonfire and stand a little too close. And then you go, oh, this plant has a whole other ability that we didn't know about, So it's obvious to me that people would have known about the psychoactive component of cannabis from a very early time. As far as actual record, we in the Neolithic era, which is about 7,000 years ago, roughly, I think. Don't quote me on that if you're a historian. They have found like shamans in burial caves and stuff with cannabis residue beside them. So, this plant has been used for a long time. I'd say it's our in a way, somebody might want to argue with me about this, but I would say cannabis could arguably be our most important plant, our most intimate friend and ally, because of its ubiquity, because it's been everywhere and it's been around for so long. And for medicine, if you look back into the historical record, all throughout Asia, they had 30, 40, 50 different conditions they were using cannabis for. The famous mystical nun and abbess Hildegard von Bingen, or Hildegard of Bingen, from Europe in around the 1100s or 1200s, somewhere in there. My history is pretty sloppy for the ones that like details, but never mind, doesn't matter. She has a pharmacopoeia. She has a couple of books. One's famous book called Physica, Physica, and it lists all of the medical uses of hundreds, I guess, of plants, and cannabis is in there as a medicinal plant, not as a meditative plant or whatever. So, in other words, and then let's talk briefly about the endocannabinoid system, the receptor system. It is, I'm told, the most prevalent receptor system in the human body, including our brains, nervous systems, and other parts of our body. And cannabis is, endo means inward or inside or whatever, or in our bodies. Exo means outside. Cannabis is an exocannabinoid, and it sits beautifully, non-toxically into these endocannabinoid receptors. And as some scientists and doctors point out, the endocannabinoid system creates homeostatic balance. So cannabis is just incredibly simpatico with us and non-toxic. I don't know, I might even have mentioned this last week, and excuse me for the repetition, but if so, but there's a term called LD50. It means the lethal dose at LD, meaning lethal dose, the lethal dose at which 50% of the people taking a particular medicine or substance will die. Alcohol has a very distinct LD50, certain, like, 30 ounces in 24 hours or something will kill you, whatever that is. Most pharmaceutical medicines have an LD50. For all intents and purposes, cannabis doesn't have an LD50. As the wonderful legendary singer-songwriter and cannabis advocate Willie Nelson once joked, the only way you could be killed by cannabis is if a bale of it fell off a truck and crushed you. So it's super simpatico with us. Now, what you and I were talking about, Joseph, before we started this conversation, I mean, before you hit the record button, was that we both agreed that it seems still, even after it's been out there, educating people this information for a number of years now, that most cannabis users, and especially maybe non-cannabis users, don't understand what this plant is actually capable of when your intention is to enter deeply into its space and not your own thoughts and so on. It has this long history of spiritual use. We were talking about the sadhus of India, for example, who they're the wandering mystics, so to speak, of India. They're still around. They're the ones of renounced society, and they just wander, or in cases they have communities as well. And they're known for being cannabis lovers. And so that it has this, at least several thousand years history that we know of. As I mentioned, the written records don't go much farther back than that, of spiritual use as well, meditative use, and so on. Here's another wonderful little example: the Sufis, the mystical tradition within Islam. Muslim. Islam is the actual religion, like Christianity. Anyway, they've been around for, I don't know, 1,000, 1,500 years or more, and they probably came out of something that preceded them as well. But in that period, like 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago, I don't know when it kind of died off in the last few hundred years with orthodoxy crushing it or whatever. But you go back 500 years, the Sufis were using hashish. And there's a famous, he must have been pretty damn famous because he's still known today in some circles. His name's Fuseli, Fuzuli. Is a Sufi poet from about 500 years ago, or maybe 600 now. Anyway, he said, hashish is the Sufi master. That's a really potent statement. Hashish is the Sufi master. In other words, if you take cannabis, hashish being, of course, the concentrated resin, if you take cannabis with the intention to surrender to the way you would with a so-called major psychedelic, to meditate, to learn to quiet your mind as much as possible, rather than just going into entertainment and, activity and so on. No judgment about those. Cannabis can enhance those, almost any activity in the right understanding and good circumstances. But if your intention is to let it be the Sufi master, so to speak, then it has an immense potential, which has been not understood in general. Are you there, Joseph? Your screen just went dark. Hello? Well, Joseph, I'll keep talking for a moment while I'm waiting for you to come back. Hopefully this will still remain on the recording. Just let me know. in the meantime, so the book that you're referring to is called Cannabis and Spirituality, as you mentioned. And the intention of the book is just what I was talking about a few moments ago, which is that it's very poorly understood what this plant is truly capable of when you can, as Terence McKenna would have put it, sit down, shut up, and pay attention. Not necessarily actually having to sit down, it could be standing or walking, but that's for that same reason, meditation techniques generally, the pure ones, if you will, the universal meditation techniques tend to say, you're sitting for that because you're not engaging other parts of your brain and body. You're actually just emptying yourself, hopefully, into the moment. So cannabis being an amplifier is actually a what you call it, an advanced spiritual medicine, potentially, because well, for one thing, if you are doing things, quote unquote, doing things, you're listening to music, you're watching something on a screen, you're emailing a friend, you're talking with people, whatever. And especially if you're an experienced cannabis user, I would say you may not notice you almost certainly will not notice the effects to the degree that you would if you stop and basically just sit in silence or learn how to quiet your mind. It's really challenging to do that for a lot of us, maybe most of us, and myself included, because of this amplification effect. It tends to ramp up the energy level and stimulate just about anything, including the thoughts in your mind, which you often will tend to exaggerate or take more seriously or think are so wonderful that you've never experienced thoughts so brilliant and clever in your normal state. So excuse me, no, pardon me, folks, I'm a little bit distracted. I don't even know if we're still recording at this point because Joseph's screen has completely disappeared on me. So I'm trying to stay focused and keep the narrative going until I see something from the lad again. So basically, the book, as I said, Cannabis and Spirituality, its mission, its intention is to inspire and educate on this potential that ideally opens one up and can, in fact, open one up to what you might call true reality or our true nature or our unconditioned reality, unconditioned nature. It can actually do that if we learn how to channel that amplified energy, that amplification energy, and channel it into because it well, okay, so stopping for a second, but going on in the same narrative line here. Um, uh, the awakening process, as I understand it, and I think this is something that's becoming increasingly embedded or understood in our cultures, is that the spiritual awakening process is also an embodiment process, that we have to have we have to be in sync with our bodies because that's what's getting us through this life, right? Some people say we're spiritual beings riding in meat vehicles or physical vehicles. So for the as one great philosopher, poet, mystic guy, French guy named Pierre Teilhard de Chardin said, physical energy must be mastered for spiritual energy to manifest. So I think that's really essential for all, for understanding this process of awakening. And so, oh, you're back,
Hello.
Joseph.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm back.
Are we still, have we been recording all this or where are we
Yeah,
at?
it's been recording the whole time.
Okay, well, good. I managed to ramble on. So I was just actually talking, I won't go on too much longer because I'm sure you have a lot of questions, but I was just talking about how one of the ways in which cannabis is almost unique as a medicine for spiritual work is that it has a lot to do with the body. It's what you might call an energy medicine, and that embodiment is an essential component of the awakening process. We have to be in sync with the energies of our body. So cannabis when you can channel that energy, when you don't get caught up in being, overly busy-minded, challenging as that is to do, and give at least some space, not necessarily having to be empty mind, without thought for hours at a time, but as long as you can leave some gaps in there, then you start to connect with yourself more in a non-mental way. You connect in an overall holistic, integrated way by being aware of your breath. And what cannabis does, by the way, in that regard, like biochemically, as far as I understand, and I'm not a scientist, so this is just things that I've read that dovetail with my own experience, is that it tends to speed up the heart a little bit at the beginning if you smoke it, as opposed to the slow onset of oral ingestion, and so that pumps rich, freshly oxygenated blood throughout the whole system, which is a pretty good explanation for why taste seems to be enhanced, listening to music and so on seems to be enhanced, visual appreciation of things tends to be enhanced. It's actually a biochemical effect. It's a chemical effect or biochemical, I mean, because it's pumping this blood throughout the system, which sharpens everything and awakens everything potentially. And if you can channel that into presence, into quieting the mind enough, as I say, to open up, it can have a very powerful physical effect, or spiritual effect. Anyway, enough about that. I've been talking for 5 or 6 minutes without stop now. So over to you, Joseph. Got some more questions?
Honestly, hey, so I had a system issue. I'm pretty sure some haters are out here trying to interrupt the connection. It happens sometimes. So, all right, yeah, we're all good now. I only heard about half of that, but I want to go ahead and discuss. We kind of talked about a little bit earlier. In the Amazon, you met a group, the Mestizo, and they were very much involved with chanting. Did you cover that, or do you want to cover
No,
that?
no.
Because these chants, they're very much uh, in like collaboration with what I know of the hymns and the psalms and like just the other cultures around the world using songs and just to say a spiritual practice, and them almost saying like they're channeling these type of songs from the higher realms. And some people, authors around the world, would say, and through their studies, that our firmament is being held up by angels chanting. I mean, I imaginably there is some type of higher realm aspect to this. You had spent some time in the Amazon um, with the Mestizo and the Santa Dame, and could you speak about that?
Sure. Well, so the word is actually mestizo, and it basically means mixed, or because the Spanish have been in South America for hundreds of years, and so there's been a lot of intermarriage and interbreeding and all that kind of thing. So a lot of the traditional indigenous people have mixed there, but basically, the simplest way of thinking about it is that these are the indigenous traditions of the Amazonian region, the upper Amazon in particular. And they've been using ayahuasca for God knows how long. Certainly the Spanish first arrived there 500-600 years ago, and they already saw these people using ayahuasca. So obviously it's been around since before then. So I don't know how far this goes back, probably forever. But they have songs that they use in the ayahuasca ceremonies. They call them icaros. It's Icaro. It would be singular, and as icaros for plural. And what I've been told is that in the pure traditions, in the real traditions, and this is actually not to distract where I'm going with this, but I think this is really important for modern day work with ayahuasca, is that the songs are actually a really important component of that. So you mentioned about channeled or received or whatever, and that's what they say these songs are, that's the way, that's part of the apprentice's training, is to learn songs, or to open up enough, to sensitize oneself enough that you start connecting to and receiving these songs. And then they become healing songs when that happens. They have a power. And in fact, I went to this one place and did ayahuasca ceremonies in Peru, in the north, near Iquitos. And the shaman or ayahuasquero there told me that those songs, those icaros, are actually spirits or beings in themselves that will come to him in the course of a ceremony. And when he's sort of like, it's as if the song can see the people in the ceremony, in the circle, in the yurt, Maloka, and they'll say, "Oh, this person needs this song. I'm the song for this person now, for this situation." So it's like that. This, you mentioned the Santo Daime religion. It comes from Brazil originally. There are 2 or 3 other religions that use ayahuasca that come from Brazil. Santo Daime is, as far as I know, far and away the most numerous and most popular in many countries. It comes from Brazil, where it's legal, which is pretty interesting. It's been granted legal status, and it's in various stages of ranging from legal to partially legal to illegal in various other countries, but it's around a lot. They're called a syncretic church because they have influences from the indigenous traditions, but they also have they lean toward Christian language. Oh, now we're really getting weird.